He said it so casually, like it didn't mean anything. Like it wasn't a dagger straight to my chest. No, just someone who helped raise me. I don't know how I stayed upright after that. I should have flipped the table, screamed, run out into the street, but I didn't. I just sat there, quiet, composed. I even smiled, nodding politely like I wasn't dying inside. That restaurant was packed, full of clinking glasses and laughter. But all I could hear was that one sentence, bouncing around in my skull like a ricochet bullet. I gave birth to him. I raised him alone. I cleaned his bloody knees when he fell off his bike. I held him through fevers, night terrors, heartbreaks. I sacrificed everything so he could have a chance. And he repaid me with that line. Just someone who helped raise me. That was the last time I saw him in person. I paid the bill. I didn't say a word. I walked out before dessert. And after that, nothing. 2 years of silence. No calls, no birthday wishes, no, how are you, Mom? Not even a text. But I saw him. I saw him in those shiny Instagram posts. He wore his father's name like a badge of honor now. That same man who disappeared before he was born. That same man who never paid a single cent in child support. The man who called me a mistake and told me he wasn't ready when I told him I was pregnant. He was in those photos too, smiling beside my son, laughing, golfing, yachting, and I would stare at the screen, asking myself the same question over and over. What did I do wrong? The truth? I didn't do anything wrong. I was just convenient. Until I wasn't. When he needed someone to pick him up from school while his shoes were falling apart at the seams, I was there. When his braces broke and we didn't have insurance, I found a way. When he got accepted into a college we couldn't afford, I worked triple shifts and cashed out the little I had in savings to get him through his first semester. I gave everything, every last bit of myself. And when I had nothing left to give, he found people who did. That's what it really came down to. His father's side had wealth, reputation, a seat at the country club. I had calluses on my hands, coupons in my purse, and a used Toyota that coughed black smoke every time it climbed a hill. I think that's when it all started to shift. He wanted something easier, shinier, cleaner. And in their eyes, I didn't fit the mold. I was just a waitress who did her best, not the kind of mother you proudly introduce at a gala. But I wasn't stupid, not even close. People often underestimate women like me. We wear thrift store cardigans and scrape together gas money, and the world assumes we don't know how it works. But one day, years ago, while refilling coffee at the counter, I met a man named Mr. Abrams. He was quiet, kind. He'd always order the same thing: black coffee, 2 eggs, dry toast. Over time, we talked. He was a retired real estate broker, and he liked the way I asked questions. So he taught me, little by little, how to spot undervalued property, how to negotiate, how to renovate without breaking the bank. I started small, one fixer-upper that I rented out, then another. I kept working my diner job while doing deals on the side, funneling every spare cent into real estate. I stayed quiet, didn't flaunt it, didn't upgrade my car or move into a fancy house. By the time I was 50, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck anymore. I was sitting on 3 apartment buildings, 6 rental properties, and a healthy portfolio that even Mr. Abrams said he was proud of. My son had no idea. He still thought of me as the woman who lived in the same modest house with the leaky faucet and the sagging porch swing. And I let him think that. Because if he didn't see my worth when I was poor, he didn't deserve to benefit when I wasn't. Then came the health scare. It wasn't cancer, thank God, but it was enough to make me pause. The kind of diagnosis that comes with a clipboard, a serious voice, and the words, "We'll need to monitor this closely." So I got my affairs in order. I wasn't planning to die anytime soon, but I wasn't planning to leave anything undone either. That's when I updated the will. I left everything to a local women's shelter and a scholarship fund, named after my own mother, his grandmother, who raised me with the same fierce love I tried to raise him with. The lawyer drafted everything cleanly by the book. And then he asked, Do you want your son to be notified? I said yes. Let him know. Let him understand. We sent the letter, and he came. Oh, he came, dressed to impress, face like thunder, heart full of entitlement. He walked into that law office with fire in his eyes. And I was already sitting there, waiting. He stood there, jaw tight, eyes flicking between me and the lawyer, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd written himself. For a long moment, no one said anything. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence as the weight of those words, "If I'm not your mother, then you're not my son," settled into the room like dust. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just looked at him, at this man who once curled up on my chest after nightmares, who used to draw crayon hearts for me on construction paper, who used to run into my arms like I was the whole damn world. And now, he was just a stranger in a suit. He cleared his throat and tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Finally, with a forced calmness, he sagt, "Why would you do this? I mean, we had a rough patch, sure, but I'm still your son." The lawyer didn't even glance at me. He just pushed another document across the table, a list of expenditures I had made for my son over the course of his life. Medical bills, tuition, rent for his first apartment, car repairs, emergency dental work, groceries, hundreds of line items, each one a receipt of love. My son stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. "This isn't about money," he said after a beat, voice cracking. "You raised me to be better than this." I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, steady, but it carried weight. "No, I raised you to remember where you came from. I raised you to value loyalty, not status. But somewhere along the way, you decided I wasn't enough." He sat back in his chair like he'd been slapped. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I could see him scrambling to find the right thing to say, the smart thing. But smart wouldn't fix this, because this wasn't about one dinner or one insult. This was about years of turning away, of skipping birthdays and holidays, of choosing brunches with strangers over phone calls to the woman who had bled for him. "I made mistakes," he finally said. "I got caught up. I was young. You don't understand the pressure I was under." I raised a hand. "Stop. Just stop. I'm not here to listen to excuses." His eyes narrowed. "You're punishing me." "No," I said, still calm. "I'm protecting myself from false love, from people who show up only when there's something to take." His jaw clenched again, and then came the anger. "You think a scholarship and a shelter deserve what I helped you build? I was your family." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it hurt. "You think you helped me build this? You think skipping family dinners and changing your last name back to his somehow contributed to my success? While you were pretending I didn't exist, I was buying buildings, fixing plumbing at 2 in the morning, filling vending machines, taking online finance courses on an old laptop with a cracked screen." The lawyer cleared his throat lightly, signaling the meeting was nearing its close. "But I wasn't done. I gave you everything I had, even when I had nothing left. And when you had a chance to give just a little of that love back, just acknowledgement, you chose pride. You chose convenience." He looked away out the window, jaw moving like he was chewing on every word. I could feel his fury. But beneath it, I saw it. Something that shook him harder than anger ever could. Regret. For the first time in years, he actually looked like my son again. Not because of his face or his clothes or his words, but because he was finally feeling something real. Still, I didn't soften. I couldn't. "You don't get to rewrite history because the outcome didn't benefit you," I said. "I lived that history. I cried in that history. And I survived it. Alone." He stood up abruptly. The chair scraped back against the hardwood floor, loud and jarring. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look at me again, just stormed out, leaving the conference room door swinging slightly on its hinge. The silence that followed was both cold and clean. The lawyer stacked the papers, placed them in a folder, and said, almost gently, You did the right thing. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what the right thing was anymore. All I knew was that I felt light, not happy, not vindicated, but free. I walked out of that building and into the street, the air crisp against my skin. The city moved around me, oblivious. People rushing to meetings, taxis honking, a dog barking at a pigeon. Life went on, and I let it. But it wasn't over, not yet. Because 2 weeks later, I got a call I never expected. A woman's voice, young, nervous. Hi, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Camille. I was dating your son. I froze. She continued, hesitating. I think you should know something. I didn't know who you were. Not really. He never talked about you. But I found something that made me question everything. There was a pause. Then she whispered, I think he used you. I think he was planning something. My heart slammed in my chest. Can we meet? She asked. Please. I think you deserve to know the truth. And just like that, the wound I thought had closed began to bleed again. I met her at a small cafe, tucked between a laundromat and a florist. It was quiet, unassuming, the kind of place where secrets could sit in the air and no one would notice. Camille looked younger than I'd expected, early 20s maybe. Brown curls pulled into a loose bun, eyes darting nervously. She was holding a folder, not a purse, a folder. As soon as I sat down, she started talking. Fast, like if she didn't get it all out now, she'd lose her nerve. He told me you were just some woman from his past, she said, eyes wide. Said you were bitter, controlling, that you tried to buy love because you didn't know how to earn it. I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse. But hearing it from someone he brought into his life, someone who now questioned him, made my stomach twist. Camille opened the folder slowly. Inside were printouts, emails, texts, a timeline, like she'd built a case. My heart sank. He was bragging to a friend, she said, sliding a screenshot across the table. Said he was going to emotionally break you down just enough to get added to your will or get something before you passed. Called you his golden goose. Said he had waited long enough. I stared at the words. The language was cold, calculated, like I was a puzzle to be solved, a lock to be picked, not a mother. He told me he forgave you, she said, tears welling in her eyes now. Said he was making peace, but I saw him practicing how to cry before he came to meet you at the lawyer's office. I looked up at her, and in that moment I didn't feel anger. I felt grief, not for myself, but for the child I'd lost somewhere along the way, for the son I thought I knew, for the love I used to believe was unshakable. He's not who you think he is, Camille whispered. He's dangerous. Not physically, I mean, but emotionally, manipulative. He's done this to other people too, his ex-friends, roommates, even me. I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. Why are you telling me this? She swallowed. Because I believed him. I judged you without ever meeting you. I thought you were some bitter old woman trying to cling to control. But when I found all this, I realized I'd been used too. I closed the folder and sat back in my chair, staring at the wall behind her. My thoughts were a blur. My past, my son, every small act of cruelty I dismissed as stress, every missed call, every gut instinct I'd buried because I didn't want it to be true. Camille reached into her bag and placed a small photo on the table. It was him, my son, as a little boy sitting on my lap. We were at a park. He had ice cream on his chin. I was smiling so wide my eyes were almost closed. I remember that day. He'd fallen off the monkey bars, scraped his knee, and I'd kissed it like it would actually fix something. I stared at it for a long time. I'm sorry, Camille said softly. I really am. I nodded, picking up the photo. I slipped it into my pocket, not because I wanted to remember him, but because I needed to remember me, who I'd been, who I'd tried to be. As Camille stood to leave, she hesitated. You should be careful. He's angry that you cut him out, that you embarrassed him. planning something, I don't know what, but it doesn't feel good." I gave her a soft smile. "Let him plan. I built my life brick by brick through storms he never even saw. He can't take what he didn't help build." Camille nodded and walked out, disappearing into the swirl of city traffic. And as I sat there in that cafe, holding onto a photo of a little boy who no longer existed, I realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one where I would protect what I had, one where I would finally choose myself, even if that meant locking the door and never opening it again. I spent the next few days in a strange haze. The world outside seemed to blur as I went about my routines. I still managed the buildings I'd worked so hard for. I still had my life to live. But that pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. The one I'd buried for years, tucked under layers of love and hope, and everything I told myself was a good reason to keep holding on. Now, it felt like all that was unraveling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not physically, but emotionally. It was as if the shadows around me had grown longer, like I could sense the weight of my son's betrayal creeping closer. Every knock on the door, every phone call felt like a threat, a sign that something was coming. But I couldn't prepare for it. No one could prepare for the truth. The week dragged on. The lawyer's office had sent me a follow-up, confirming that everything was in order. My will was sealed. There was no going back, no revisiting old choices. It was done. But what weighed on me more than the legalities, more than the money, was the empty space in my heart. The small hope that I could have my son back. But how could I, after all he'd done? That question clung to me like a shadow as I stepped into the elevator at the apartment complex. The world outside the glass walls seemed so far away, almost unreachable. There was nothing left for me in the past, no version of him I could hold on to. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the lobby, the tall, lean figure I'd raised, wearing a suit too expensive for someone who didn't value family. The arrogance in his posture was unmistakable. He wasn't just standing there. He was waiting for me. And for the first time in years, I felt that same sense of dread that had lived in my gut when I first found out about his neglect. When I'd first realized, bit by bit, that the man I had given everything to was slipping away from me. He stepped forward as the elevator doors opened, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice too calm, like he had rehearsed it 1,000 times in his head. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence hang between us, thick and suffocating. His words didn't need a response. Everything he had said to me, every betrayal, every cruel word, it didn't need to be repeated. "I'm here for what's mine," he continued, leaning against the elevator wall. "What you've kept from me. It's not just money, Mom. It's my inheritance, my legacy." I could feel my chest tighten at the word mom. It wasn't real. It wasn't the same. He wasn't speaking to me out of love. He was speaking to me out of entitlement. "I've earned it," he said. "I deserve it. After everything I've done to make you proud, this is my payoff." I was shaking now, not out of fear, but out of sheer frustration. How had he turned into this? How had my son become someone who would manipulate and twist my love for him into something dark and disgusting? "You haven't earned anything," I said quietly, the words tasting foreign on my tongue. "You lost it when you chose to walk away, when you chose to forget everything I did for you. I built this life, not you." He straightened up, eyes narrowing. "You think I want to hear that? After everything you've done?" He stopped, almost choking on his words. It was as if a switch had flipped inside him. All the anger, all the pain, poured out in a single bitter rush. "After everything I've been through because of you," he spat, stepping closer. "After all the years I spent trying to make myself good enough for you and you just cut me off? You're the one who made this impossible. You made me feel like nothing, like I wasn't worth a damn thing." I could see the raw pain in his eyes. It was all there, buried beneath the arrogance. I felt it, his pain, but I couldn't carry it anymore. I couldn't keep letting him use me as a punching bag. Emotionally, physically. I had spent enough years taking the blame, feeling responsible for his decisions, his missteps. You made the choices, I said, my voice trembling. Not me. I didn't push you away. I didn't want to lose you. But you pushed me. You turned your back on me. You ignored me when I needed you. The silence stretched. His eyes, once full of anger, softened for just a moment. But the moment was fleeting, and he quickly replaced it with a cold sneer. I'll get what's mine, he said, the words final and cold, as though he'd already made peace with his decisions. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. He was lost in a way I couldn't reach. I couldn't save him from himself anymore. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt my knees go weak. As he turned to leave, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. My son, my child, was no longer a part of my life. Not the way I had hoped, not the way I had dreamed. The door closed with a finality that echoed through the quiet hall. I stayed in the lobby for a long time after. The elevator ride up was a blur, but I couldn't escape the feeling that everything had shifted. The balance had tipped. My son was gone. Not in a physical sense, but in a way that could never be fixed. And just like that, I knew I had nothing left to give him. Not anymore. But the real twist, as I sat there trying to find some semblance of peace in the wreckage of my past, I realized something. My son wasn't just after my money, he was after control. And he thought he could get it. But there was no control left to take. The days that followed were oddly quiet. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I couldn't shake the image of him, his face twisted with anger, his hands clenched into fists, his voice laced with resentment. He wasn't the young boy I had raised anymore. That child, the one who would sit on my lap after a long day and whisper, "I love you, Mom," had disappeared. All that was left was a man who barely recognized me, a man who was so far gone in his own bitterness that he couldn't see how much I had sacrificed to get him to the point he was at. I had thought about him often over the years, about how he would turn out, what kind of person he'd become. I imagined him as a young man, someone with dreams, someone who had inherited my determination, my work ethic, maybe even a bit of my stubbornness. I thought I had done everything right. But I was wrong, so wrong. And now, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I realized I had been grieving the wrong person all along. It wasn't just him I'd lost, it was the idea of him, the version of him I'd built up in my mind. I had held on to this vision of my son that had long since disappeared. The reality was that he was a stranger to me now, someone who had been shaped by others, by his father's family, by money, by a world that didn't care about the blood and tears I had shed for him. The truth hurt more than I thought it would. It left me numb, but not in the way I expected. I thought I would feel a deep ache, a sense of loss so overwhelming that I would be crippled by it. But instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. Relief that I no longer had to carry the burden of being responsible for his happiness, for his future, for the choices he made. Relief that I didn't have to pretend that everything was okay when I knew it wasn't. That's when I began to let go. Not just of him, but of the guilt. The guilt I had carried for years. The guilt that had eaten me alive for so long. The guilt that I wasn't enough for him. I wasn't perfect, but I had done everything in my power to give him a good life, to make sure he knew love, that he felt supported, that he had every opportunity to succeed. It wasn't my fault that he chose to walk away. It wasn't my fault that he decided to build his life on the foundation of lies and resentment. It wasn't my fault that he chose to disregard everything I had done for him. I didn't have to carry the weight of his choices anymore. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the phone rang. I stared at the screen for a moment, the caller ID displaying my lawyer's name. A wave of unease washed over me, but I picked up anyway. Hello? Mrs. Thompson? It was my lawyer, his voice calm, professional. I just wanted to update you on the status of the estate. Your son has, well, he's requested a meeting. He's asking for reconsideration. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady my nerves. Reconsideration? What for? There's some argument over the validity of your will, he said. He's claiming you made the decision under duress, that you weren't in sound mind when you made it. I could feel the anger rising within me. That's ridiculous. I made that decision with a clear mind and a full heart. I understand, but he's threatening to contest the will in court. He's adamant that he should be the rightful heir, that you owe him. Owe him? I echoed, the words tasting sour in my mouth. He hasn't spoken to me in years, and now he thinks I owe him? Yes, and if it goes to court, it could take years before anything is settled. I wanted to make sure you're prepared for that possibility. I took a moment to process what he was saying. My son was trying to take what little I had left, what I had worked so hard for. He wasn't after love anymore. He was after money, after control, after everything. I'm not backing down, I said firmly, the words coming out stronger than I expected. Tell him to bring it. He won't get a cent from me. The line was silent for a moment before my lawyer spoke again. I'll make sure the documents are airtight. But, Mrs. Thompson, I don't need to tell you how much this could escalate. It could get ugly. I sighed, rubbing my forehead. It already is. The conversation ended shortly after, but the weight of what was to come hung over me. My son wasn't going to stop. I could feel it in my bones. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was determined. And I wasn't sure how far he was willing to go to get what he thought was owed to him. It hit me then, a sudden clarity. He had no idea who I was anymore. He had no idea what I had become, what I had built. He still saw me as the woman who worked in a diner, who struggled to make ends meet. But I wasn't that woman anymore, and I would never let him see me that way again. I had spent so many years bending over backward to make him proud, to make him see me as more than just the woman who raised him. But now, I was done. Done with the guilt, done with the expectations, done with the idea that I needed him to see me in a certain light. I wasn't going to fight him for the money. I wasn't going to let him drag me through the mud again. But I was going to fight for my peace. And that, I realized, was worth far more than anything he could ever take from me. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I went to work, I managed my buildings, and I kept moving forward. But I could feel the storm brewing. My son's threats weren't hibbable. He was serious about taking me to court. The day of the court hearing came faster than I expected. I wasn't sure what I was walking into. I wasn't even sure if I was ready for it. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw him sitting there, across from me. His expression was colder than I'd ever seen it. There was no recognition in his eyes. Just a man who felt entitled to something that wasn't his. The judge called the session to order, and as the proceedings began, I felt the weight of everything I had built, the life I had fought for, resting on my shoulders. This wasn't just a battle over money. This was a fight for everything I had left. As my lawyer began to present the case, I couldn't help but glance over at my son. His face was impassive, as if he were completely detached from everything that had happened between us. It hit me then. He had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. The next few hours dragged on, but the decision came quickly. The judge ruled in my favor. The will stood. The estate remained as I had dictated. My son would get nothing. I sat there numb as the gavel came down. The finality of it hit me like a wave, but oddly enough, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. As we stood to leave, my son looked at me one last time, his eyes full of bitterness. But it wasn't anger I saw anymore. It was resignation. He had fought for everything he thought was his. But in the end, he hadn't gotten what he wanted. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory I could have ever hoped for. It was over. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe again. Dot continue ChatGPT Skazal. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. The weight of the battle had been immense, and yet, as I stepped into the sunlight, I felt like a new chapter of my life was beginning. The world around me seemed brighter, more vibrant. I no longer felt shackled by the past, by the guilt and the anger that had clouded my mind for so long. The years of struggling, the years of hoping he would come around, had left me hollow in many ways. But now, I could finally let go of the idea that I needed him to validate me. I had to realize that his choices were his own. I wasn't responsible for them. I had given him everything I could, and now it was time to focus on what I had left, on rebuilding my own life, on embracing the future, not the past. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet, free from the chains of guilt and responsibility I had carried for far too long. It wasn't that I didn't care for him anymore. I would always love him, always wish the best for him. But I had to accept that sometimes people make choices that can't be undone. I hadn't just fought for my peace during the court hearing, I had fought for my own self-respect. I walked away from that courtroom knowing that I had done what I needed to do. And in the process, I had reclaimed my life. The days that followed were quieter, but in the most peaceful way. My thoughts no longer swirled with anger, confusion, or resentment. I still thought about my son, of course. It was impossible not to. But I'd stopped trying to change him, stopped waiting for him to come back, stopped wishing for a reconciliation that might never come. I realized that the life I had built for myself was my own, and that in itself was enough. I didn't need him to be proud of me. I didn't need his approval. And most importantly, I didn't need to carry the burden of his choices anymore. One evening, months later, I received a call. It was an unfamiliar number, but something told me I should answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady, though my heart raced slightly. "Mom?" The voice on the other end was strained, hesitant. My breath caught in my throat. "Alex?" I asked, unsure if I was hearing correctly. There was a long pause. Then quietly he spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how things ended, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for how I treated you. You didn't deserve any of that. I was angry and I took it out on you." "You didn't deserve that." I stood there frozen, holding the phone to my ear. His apology, though long overdue, felt like a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. But as the weight of it sank in, I also felt something else, a sense of detachment, a sense of acceptance. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "But I can't go back. I can't just forget what happened. We both need to heal, but that doesn't mean I'm going to pretend everything's okay. It's going to take time. It's going to take work." "I understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I needed you to know that I'm not the same person I was. And maybe we can start over, even if it's slow." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The old me would have clung to that apology, desperate for some sort of reconciliation, for some kind of closure. But the new me, she was different. She understood that healing wasn't about rushing back into a relationship just because it was convenient or because the other person finally came to their senses. Healing was about acknowledging the past, accepting it, and allowing yourself to move forward on your own terms. "I don't know what the future holds, Alex," I said slowly, "but I'm willing to take it one day at a time. I hope you understand that." "I do," he answered quietly, and I could almost hear the relief in his voice. And that was it. We didn't say much more that night, but something had shifted between us. Something that felt like the first step toward rebuilding, even if it wasn't immediate, even if it wasn't perfect. There was still a long road ahead, but the conversation had given me hope, something I hadn't realized I needed so badly. The road to healing is never straightforward, and it's never easy. But sometimes it's the most unexpected moments, like a simple apology, that can open the door to change. Whether my son and I would ever fully rebuild our relationship, I didn't know. But I knew that for the first time in a long while, I was at peace with whatever came next. For me, that was enough. The days after that phone call were a blur of mixed emotions. Part of me wanted to dive into this new chapter with my son, hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we could mend the years of silence. But another part of me, one that had learned the hard way to guard my heart, held back. I didn't want to fall into the same patterns, to hope for things that might never materialize. I kept myself busy with the things that mattered most to me now. My work, my projects, my plans. My life had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. The properties I'd invested in had blossomed into more than just income. They had become a source of pride, something I had built from the ground up. It wasn't just about the financial freedom anymore. It was about the confidence that came with knowing I could stand on my own, that I could navigate the world without needing validation from anyone, least of all my son. But the phone call lingered in the back of my mind. Every time I saw his face in those old photos, the ones I kept hidden away in a box, I felt a twinge of longing. A part of me still wanted to reach out, to call him, to pull him back into my life. But that was the old me, the one who had spent too many nights hoping for a miracle. Instead, I focused on what was in front of me, the present. I spent more time at my properties, improving them, making them feel like homes, not just buildings. I hired a small team to help manage the renovations, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. I wasn't just working for survival anymore. I was building something that had meaning, that would last long after I was gone. One afternoon, several months after that phone call, I sat in the quiet of my office, staring at the cityscape outside. It was a moment of peace, something I had longed for so long. And yet, the quiet wasn't as comforting as it used to be. It felt lonely. For the first time in years, I realized how much I missed the idea of family. Not the family I had once dreamed of with my son, but the warmth of companionship, the sense of connection that comes with having someone to share life with. I had always thought I could fill that emptiness with work, with success, with financial security, but now I knew that wasn't enough. It wasn't until later that evening when I was walking through the park near my apartment that I saw him, my son. He was sitting on a bench, looking out at the setting sun, his shoulders slumped. I didn't even recognize him at first. He had changed. The last time I'd seen him, he had been a young man full of ambition, eager to carve out his place in the world. Now, he seemed more like a stranger to me, his face marked with the kind of weight that only time can bring. I didn't know what came over me, but I walked up to him. Slowly, tentatively, the air between us felt charged, as though neither of us was quite sure what the other would say or do. He didn't notice me at first, but when I stood in front of him, he looked up, his eyes wide in surprise. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was as if the world had stopped, and all that mattered was this single, fleeting moment. "Mom?" he asked softly, his voice almost a whisper. I nodded, my throat tight. "Hi, Alex." He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I didn't expect you to come here." I smiled weakly. Neither did I. He shifted uneasily on the bench, as if unsure of what to do with himself. "I've been trying to make sense of everything," he said. "Everything that happened. The way I treated you, the way I turned my back on you. I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't know where to start." I could feel the sincerity in his voice, but it didn't erase the years of hurt. I wanted to say something, anything, but words failed me. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much it hurt, how much I had sacrificed. But at the same time, I didn't want to get stuck in that cycle of pain again. I had to protect myself, even if it meant letting go. Instead, I sat down beside him on the bench, keeping some distance between us. You don't need to fix everything, Alex. It's not about fixing the past. It's about what you do now, about what we do going forward. But don't expect me to just forget or pretend it never happened. He nodded slowly and his eyes downcast. I understand. I don't expect you to. There was a long pause, the kind that stretched out between us like an ocean of unspoken words. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, we both just sat there, in silence, listening to the world go by. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice barely audible. I was wrong. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I had cried enough. I had spent too many years crying for something that wasn't there, for a relationship that had slipped through my fingers. I couldn't keep mourning what wasn't meant to be. I know you are, I said, my voice steady. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about fixing what had been broken. It wasn't about getting back the mother-son relationship we once had, because that was gone. It was about moving forward together, in whatever form that might take. It was about accepting that sometimes you can't change the past, but you can decide how to live in the present. I don't know where this goes from here, I said, my voice quieter now. But I'm willing to try if you are. Alex nodded, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a promise that everything would be okay. But for the first time, it felt like we were both willing to step into the unknown together, even if we had no idea where it would lead. And that was enough. As we sat there, the evening sky stretched out before us, filled with the fading colors of the sunset. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on the edge of something new, something that might just be worth waiting for. The main character, after years of struggle and patience, has finally reached the culmination of his journey for justice. His motivation has shifted from the desire for revenge to a need for closure and to restore his sense of integrity. He is no longer driven by anger, but by the need to see truth triumph, to expose the wrongdoers, and ensure they can't hurt anyone else. The antagonists, once powerful and ruthless, now stand in front of the world, exposed and defeated. The once dominant CEO, who manipulated and destroyed lives for his own gain, watches helplessly as his empire crumbles. His business is seized by authorities. His ill-gotten wealth disappears, and his name becomes synonymous with deceit. His family, who once supported him blindly, has abandoned him, unable to look past his crimes. The once untouchable villain is now a shadow of the person they used to be. In this moment of victory, the protagonist is not alone. He is surrounded by friends and allies who have stood by him through the darkest times. Trusted colleagues, loyal friends, and even a family member who once doubted him, but now sees the true cost of betrayal. They witness the downfall of the antagonist. And while the protagonist doesn't need validation, their presence is a quiet reminder that justice can still prevail. The protagonist's revenge comes not through violent retribution, but through the full force of the law and public exposure. Armed with irrefutable evidence, he orchestrates a masterful legal strategy that exposes the antagonist's crimes using a combination of whistleblowers, hacked emails, and damning financial documents. He watches from the front row as the antagonist is publicly humiliated in court, his lies unraveling in front of the world. The antagonist's fatal mistake was underestimating the protagonist's determination and resilience. He thought he could hide behind his wealth and power forever, using his influence to protect himself. But greed clouded his judgment, and his arrogance blinded him to the growing storm of consequences that was coming for him. After seeing the antagonist's empire collapse, the protagonist feels a mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The revenge he sought for so long has been realized, but it doesn't fill the void he once thought it would. The weight of what he's lost over the years, the relationships destroyed in the pursuit of this moment, suddenly feels heavier than the triumph itself. He realizes that while he's won, it hasn't healed the wounds of the past. The scars remain, but at least justice has been served. Now that the antagonist has fallen, the protagonist finds himself at a crossroads. His personal life, which had been overshadowed by the need for revenge, begins to take a new shape. He has the opportunity to rebuild, to heal, and even to find new love with someone who values him for who he is, not just for his past victories. The city buzzes with the news of the antagonist's downfall. People in the protagonist's life who once questioned his choices and methods now look at him with a new respect. The former ally who had turned against him now tries to reconnect, but the protagonist has no time for hollow apologies. He has moved on. The antagonist, now a social pariah, struggles with the consequences of his actions. He is left alone, his wealth gone, and his reputation in ruins. His desperate attempts to rebuild his life are met with rejection, and as the protagonist watches him from a distance, he feels no pity, only the bitter satisfaction of knowing that justice was done. However, there's a lingering sense of uncertainty in the air. The protagonist receives a mysterious letter, an anonymous message that hints at unfinished business. He doesn't know what it means yet, but he's learned the hard way not to assume anything is ever truly over. As the antagonist leaves the courtroom in disgrace, the protagonist stands tall, unshaken. He catches the antagonist's eye for just a moment, and with a cold smile, he says, "I hope you enjoy the view from the bottom. It's where you belong." The antagonist glares back, but there's nothing left he can say. The protagonist watches him walk away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. With a final glance, he turns to his friends and allies and says, "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." As he walks away from the ruins of the life he once knew, there's no joy in his step, just a quiet resolve. The past is behind him now, and the future is uncertain, but at least he's free.